morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you are joining us. We are really glad that we are back again in the classroom, and this session is going to be recorded, so you have a message coming on your screen, and I think if you press the blue button, that would automatically mean that you're staying with us. So we know that the numbers will go up. Thank you to all the participants. We have 60 in the room, but you know, as per practice, I think we have managed to have more than 100 every other Saturday. So you're really welcome to this lecture session today. Yes, we have switched up a little bit, as you can see in the schedule. We have decided to go ahead and talk about regional and international actors that are related to migration. And you know, we wanted to take advantage of having a great scholar with us, and the presence of our eminent speakers and our eminent professors as well, who are part of this course. So as a way of introduction, I would like to introduce Professor Irudaya Rajan, who is a former professor at the Center of Development Studies in Kerala, and he's currently the chair of the Global Knowledge Partnership on Migration and Development, commonly known as CNOMAD, for those who would know. It's a World Bank working group on internal migration and urbanization, and he's one of the expert committee members to advise the government of Kerala on COVID-19. He's well known in terms of the publications that he has done, international journals on many different dimensions that are related to migration, be it psychological, political, demographic side, the economic side, as well as really looking at what those implications are like from the the state of the society, the community, migrants, individuals, and he has been an editor of an annual series on India Migration Report since 2010. So a lot of information, and we will be sharing also his bio so that you could look, you could have a look at it. And he's the editor-in-chief for migration and development with Taylor and Francis. So one of the reports that he published rather under that publication house. But all this to say is that you have seen the logos on the top every time we have the webinars, and so he is with the International Institute for Migration and Development, and we are really glad that as a founder chairperson, he's really been steering behind and supporting in bringing other speakers, but also participating also as a lecturer. He has done a lecture with us here. So Professor Rajan, we're really glad that you're here today, and we are happy that you're going to support us with introducing our guest speaker for.
Thank you, Dr. Paddy, for the kind introduction. And I know many of them, including Professor Vinod, and me and Professor Vinod probably known almost close to 3 decades now. And PC also, I know him for quite some time because we are all friends to one common person, probably K.C. Sakaria. You know, just I saw him yesterday, he's 98 now. And of course, he still moves around in the house, not able to come out. He brought me to migration, basically. He baptized me to study migration. In fact, I was baptized by him to study migration, basically. Otherwise, I had no interest on migration till 30 years back. My interest was on the old people's issues. Still, I continue to work on old people issue, but now my time is divided between migration and aging. And today, my task is to introduce one of my good friend, and I'm very glad Dr. Pesri joined with us. And Dr. Pesri Vikramasehara, a Sri Lankan national, is currently Vice President of the Global Migration Policy Associates, an international network of migration experts, something like a GFRDA. He is an internationally recognized expert in development, migration, and employment issues. He joined the International Labour Organization in 1985 and was senior migration specialist in the International Migration Branch of the ILO Geneva from 2001 to 2010. He has a vast experience working in ILO. I met him in some meetings in ILOs several times. His expertise covers Asian labor migration, governance of migration, migration and development, circular migration, rights of migrant workers, which is close to his heart, irregular migration, bilateral labor migration instruments, and migration statistics. He was one of the architects of ILO Multilateral Framework on Labor Migration in 2006 and co-authored the 2010 ILO flagship volume, International Labor Migration, a Right-Based Approach. He is a member of the ILO Working Group on Labor Migration Statistics for defining international standards on labor migration statistics. In recent years, he has carried out extensive research and provided advisory services on the development of bilateral labor migration instruments to the African Union, IGAD, and South Asia, particularly Bangladesh and Nepal. He also contributed extensively to the Asian guidelines on effective return and reintegration of migrant workers, which is a hot topic today after the COVID-19. He's a regular faculty member in the ILO's International Training Center at Italy on labor migration courses. And he has his PhD in economics from the University of Cambridge, UK. I'm very pleased with the PhD to join with us to give this special lecture. And PhD, it is your time. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rajan, for your kind words. I wish I had written a much shorter bio hearing you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, wherever you are. I'm very happy to be with you. And also, first of all, let me thank the joint organizers of this lecture, and particularly Rajan and Paddy, who got me involved in the meeting. So I have some good news and bad news. I will start with the bad news is that I have a long presentation. Good news is that I shall try to skip some of them and also try to run it quite fast and expect Paddy to control me if I try to take too much time. I shall share my screen. Paddy, I shall go ahead now.
Yes, please. Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Oh. What happened?
We can see it. And I think
one second. Yeah, something happened there. It is not disappeared somewhere. Let me again see.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. I will bring it. It's got shifted to this end. Yeah.
Slide show, you can go little up.
Yes. Yeah, I can't. Yeah. Why did it get shifted? Yes. Yeah. Let me see. I have to expand it and then go for the slideshow, I guess. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Super. Thank you very much. It's good now. It's very clear.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, yes, actually, I took the liberty of modifying the title of the presentation because given the limited time and so I'm not talking about multilateral stakeholders, actors themselves, but about multilateral processes where I shall be talking about regional and international migration mechanisms because it's a vast, the scope is very vast, so if I get carried away, I cannot do justice within this period. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let me see. Okay. Yes. The structure of my presentation, I start with a very brief definition of what I mean by governance, and then highlight normative foundations and what issues need to be addressed in governance of migration, whether at global or regional level. And then highlight some multilateral initiatives and gaps in the global migration governance architecture. And then talk about some multilateral processes, GFMD, SDGs, GCMN, UN Network on Migration. And finally, with regional mechanisms, which will be a shorter one. So let me start with some statements. Mr. Johan Somavia, former Director General of the ILO, he said migrants are an asset to every country where they bring their labor. Let us give them the dignity they deserve as human beings and the respect they deserve as workers. This is actually what is missing now. Many countries do not recognize the value of migrant workers. Then Kofi Annan, former Secretary General of the UN, in his address to the European Union in 2004, when European Union was very reluctant to admit migrant workers, he made great advocacy for the European Union. He said the vast majority of migrants are industrious, courageous, and determined. They do not want a free ride. They want a fair opportunity. They are not criminals or terrorists. They are law-abiding. They don't want to live apart. They want to integrate while retaining their identity. This challenges the very common stereotypes about migrant workers in developed countries, that they are terrorists, criminals, etc., especially promoted after the 9/11 events. It's a very inspirational speech. You should read that. I have given the link here. Finally, I come to our region, Asian region, where Philippines, President Aquino's social contract with the Filipino people, a 16-point agenda about migration, from a government that treats its people as an export commodity and a means to earn foreign exchange, disregarding the social cost to Filipino families. This is the current situation at the time, 2011. To a government that creates jobs at home so that working abroad will be a choice rather than a necessity. And when its citizens do choose to become overseas Filipino workers, their welfare and protection shall be the government's priority. Very good words. But if you look at what happened since 2011, the Philippines, they have been promoting migration, at the expense of rights. Yeah? How do I actually minimize this? Okay. So some words about governance. Actually, when I was in the ILO, we were not very happy about this term management, and we started using the term governance. So management implies that states are being able to unilaterally handle migration. Who manages migration? In fact, a lot of people manage migration, not only states. It could also imply migration control instead of governance. Does not necessarily provide for consultative process when you say manage migration, one or two, few persons managing migration. So the nature of governance is it's multi-layered. Governance is much more than government action, many actors, all concerned stakeholders. This is a whole of society approach promoted by the Global Compact for Migration. And also governance is at multi-level, national, regional, global, corporate levels. And also there are multi-mechanisms, formal, informal, rules and implementation which affect migration. International instruments provide a solid foundation for good governance of migration, ILO and UN instruments. This is a diagram I stole from the UN Habitat. It captures the idea of governance, which can apply to migration as well. Accountable, transparent, responsive, equitable and inclusive, effective and efficient, follow the rule of law, participatory, consensus oriented. If you look at a country like the UK, you can see it's the very opposite of these criteria. They have draconian migration policies, which even their new borders bill, which tries to make refugees criminals, etc. And they have retrospective acts, which Binod has pointed out many times. So what are the normative foundation of global governance? I'm sorry, I cannot go into detail, but you probably had one lecture on this. 9 universal human rights of the United Nations, 8 fundamental ILO conventions enshrined in the ILO declaration relating to forced labor, child labor, freedom of association, and non-discrimination. They are applicable to all workers, including migrant workers, and regardless of migration status, whether regular or irregular. Fundamental labor rights. And then 3 international migrant worker conventions, the 2 ILO conventions, 1949 and 1975, and the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers are members of their families, 1990. Yeah. It took 10 years to negotiate and another 13 years to come into force. And all labor standards apply to workers in the workplace according to the ILO, including migrant workers, particularly Private Employment Agencies Convention, Domestic Work Convention, Harassment Convention, and a number of other conventions apply to migrant workers. And there are non-binding normative frameworks which are becoming more common. The ILO Multilateral Framework on Labor Migration and ILO Guidelines for Fair Recruitment. So let me also talk about what is a rights-based approach. Let me recount that in 2005, when ILO was debating in a tripartite meeting the multilateral framework for labor migration, the Japanese government delegate got up and asked, what does this right-based mean? Does it mean any person in the world, from any country in the world can walk into my country without a visa? Of course, we know this is a very simplistic way of looking at it, because we know that there is a human right. Any person can leave his or her country of citizenship. Also, any person can return to the country of birth. But there is no corresponding right of admission to a third country, which is jealously guarded by the principle of national sovereignty by all the countries. In the EU, of course, there is some surrender of this right, but if countries don't admit people, they have to explain why. But normally, the right of admission is open to the country of destination only. So what this means is actually Max Frisch, the Swiss philosopher, said, we wanted workers, but we got people. This is the difference between commodities and human beings. Recognize that migrant workers have intrinsic human and labor rights regardless of their status, directly linked to rights based on international norms. Accountability of duty bearers, the people who are responsible for protecting rights, providing rights, states, employers, or society. And also rights holders, migrant workers have to be empowered. They should be aware of their rights. We know that many migrant workers don't know what their rights are. And effective and inclusive participation to reflect their concerns and experience. We have many seminars, many consultations, many policies where migrants are not part of them. We try to decide for them without involving them. Non-discrimination and equal treatment. These are the cardinal principles in international instruments, the core values. Attention to vulnerable groups who need special support because when there are limited resources, we have to focus on the most vulnerable. And establishing a platform for cooperation, including both migrant and human rights NGOs and trade unions. So let me come to this term, safe, orderly, and regular migration. This is the language used in the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda and the Global Compact for Migration. SDG 10.7 refers to safe, regular, and responsible migration. In fact, if you look back, most of these have origins in IOM. IOM was using this term, safe, orderly, and humane migration for many years before the GCM and SDG. Yeah. So, and they had a lot of influence in this government negotiated process. The problem is these terms focus on the process, not on migrant workers or their rights and access to decent work. In the process, they say safe migration for whom? The state or the migrant? One can migrate safely and still get exploited at the other end. And orderly does not mean anything. It has no normative connotation. Even slave trade was orderly, according to Roger Bonning, former migration guru of the ILO. Regular, there are two aspects, regular avenues for labor migration and regular status of migrant workers. What do you really mean? So the goal should be migration in conditions of dignity, equity, justice, and security, which are coming in some of their national policies. But we have to live with these terms because they are already enshrined in the SDG agenda, GCM. So let us qualify wherever possible, safe, orderly migration, consistent with the rights of migrant workers and their dignity. So multi-stakeholders, I mean, this was the original topic. So all parties with a stake in migration issues, including states. Why do we need this participation? Complexity of migration processes, it's a multi-dimensional nature of migration, which is recognized in the GCM. Because migration is a political issue also. It's part of street politics. That is why many governments want to show that they have migration under control and they will throw out all the undesirable aliens, etc. So no single agency or actor can handle this complex issue. So we need the more the merrier. Whole of society approach of GCM, they defined all this, but of course they have to specifically refer to employers, business organizations, and private and public recruitment agencies, as well as international organizations, which are missing in their elaboration. And civil society, not only dedicated civil society dedicated to migration issues, but there are many CSOs with main focus in other areas like health and other things, but have interest in migration and migrant workers. But the bottom line is that there is absence of strong migrant and migrant worker organizations with their own platform. Migrant voice is absent. In many cases, they don't have that space for expressing their views. So what are the issues to be tackled in global migration frameworks? Governance. Here, developing innovative programs for migration of both low and skilled workers, facilitating mobility and circulation. Because we know that there are many programs for migration of skilled workers. Binod, Raj, and they have actually talked about that in their writings. Yeah. But our countries have a surplus of low-skilled workers. The greatest impact of poverty, according to the World Bank and others, is through the migration of low-skilled workers. But unfortunately, except the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, which had their doors open since the 1970s for low-skilled workers, many developed countries, Australia, Canada, or UK, they don't open the doors to low-skilled workers, if at all, very limited numbers. This is what Nigel Harris, in his book in 1991, The Untouchables, said, the apartheid in international migration. The Global Commission on International Labor Migration recognized this. They said essential workers. They did not like this distinction between low-skilled, high-skilled. Yeah. And this is also recognized recently during the pandemic. Essential workers in agriculture, care work, domestic work, and health workers. Yeah. But the problem is we don't give that treatment to these essential workers. Then minimizing irregular migration, including smuggling and trafficking of persons. Yeah. Of course, we know this is high on the agenda of the European Union and developed countries. But the problem is when they keep their front door close to low-skilled workers, of course, they have to go through the back door because there is a thriving demand for low-skilled workers in the informal sectors and other sectors. And then you brand them as illegals. And fair recruitment, which is very high on the international agenda. I've been talking it ever since I joined the ILO in 1985, and we have been talking about recruitment. Of course, now only we talk about fair recruitment. At that time, ethical recruitment, all that. But what have we achieved? Very little. I mean, still, migrant workers are being exploited. And involving concerned stakeholders in policies, social partners, civil society, all that. Protection. Addressing the rampant abuse and exploitation of migrant workers and ensure decent work and protection of migrant workers. Whatever foreign processes we have, I mean, this is the bottom line is that our workers get exploited. During the pandemic, we saw the extreme precarious situation of precarity of our migrant workers. Eliminating discrimination and poor integration of migrants in host society. And migration and development is a major issue. Maximizing development of benefits of migration through remittances, return migration, and diaspora, and addressing brain drain from developing countries, and cooperation, international, regional, bilateral, and global level. So there is multi-layered governance mechanisms, global institutions. There is no global UN agency with full mandate on migration. It's fragmented. I will come to that. Then you have binding multilateral conventions. If they ratify, they are binding. They need ratification and enforcement for compliance. But many developed countries, if you take the UN Convention on Migrant Workers, not willing to ratify and enforce it. No EU country or North American country has ratified the International Convention, although ILO conventions have been ratified by European Union countries. You have non-binding normative instruments, soft law. This is increasingly common. I already mentioned the ILO recommendations on migration are all soft law and multilateral framework, recruitment guidelines. Then you have regional integration areas or regional economic committees, where the main focus is not on migration, but of course migration come into a lot because of free movement of persons and labor. And the idea is actually to create a common market. Then you have non-binding interstate consultative processes, intergovernmental law, global compact on migration, GFMD, regional consultative processes. And bilateral, if this is not possible, you can have bilateral discussions between two countries, negotiations, bilateral agreements, labor agreements, and MOUs. Unilateral, most global migration movements occur under unilateral systems, so Australia, Canada, USA, UK. So global governance, migration, what are the institutional gaps? ILO has a clear mandate on labor migration protection of migrant workers, pioneered international instruments for protection, but of course they cover only that labor migration. UNHCR deals with forced migration and the Refugee Convention and Protocol. Commissioner for Human Rights, it's human rights of migrants, responsible for the convention and the Committee on Migrant Workers. You have a special rapporteur also. International Organization for Migration, IOM. It is still an intergovernmental organization servicing member governments. It's now a UN-related organization. It's not a UN migration agency or UN organization, just a related organization like the WTO or the Atomic Energy Authority. It's a non-normative organization that has no protection mandate. And its constitution is the same after it joined as a related organization also. Then UN-DESA department, they were responsible for the UN high-level dialogue process, and also they compile this international migration stock data. UNDOC responsible for trafficking in persons and smuggling of human beings. UNDP deals with migration and development mainly. So there are there have been multiple initiatives. I will skip through this because I have highlighted only this 2004 ILO general discussion and the related resolution, because that is not mentioned by many of agencies when they present multilateral initiatives, even IOM and also even UNDESA and others. It is a very big conference with discussion spread in 3 weeks, involving tripartite group and negotiated instrument, global commission, high-level dialogues, and then finally global compact for migration and a UN network. So let me come to the Global Forum on Migration and Development. This was set up by the UN High-Level Dialogue on Migration and Development in 2006. It's a state-led process outside the UN system. Originally, the UN wanted to have it under ECOSOC, but they got a strong message from developed countries. They will veto any such move. So Kofi Annan, in his inauguration of the UN High-Level Dialogue in 2006, started by welcoming the offer of Belgium to host the first GFMD in Belgium. It is a voluntary, intergovernmental, non-binding and informal consultative process on migration and development open to all states. Because at that time, this is the area where they could get some consensus, migration and development. Nobody would question that it's not about rights of migrant workers or admission to developed countries or regular admissions. So there was an agreement on that. They have annual, biennial summits with voluntary host country, open to UN system as observers, and objectives to share experiences, dialogue on international cooperation, and foster practical and action-oriented outcomes. They have organized, it is organized among thematic roundtables, remittances, diaspora, irregular migration, return migration, protection, skills, which are related to migration and development. Innovative business mechanism, and because to recognize the role of the private sector and recognize the role of local government and cities, mayoral mechanism added. UN system still provides support, and IOM the secretariat support. You can access all in their website. These are the various forums and 2022 France and Senegal. So what are the GFMD strengths and weaknesses? Informality has allowed for trust building. This is based on their own analysis, and large body of knowledge generated and shared with UN processes. There's a large policy and practice database submitted by governments and other stakeholders. It's sort of moderated database, but whatever government submit. Flexible format has allowed for experimentation. Civil society space expanded. Weaknesses are the ad hoc nature. There's no sustainability among chairmanships. There's lack of review and follow-up. Sustainability, financial and political. Initially, no chair volunteered for 2021, but now we have for 2022, France and Senegal, as I mentioned. And the Global Compact for Migration and UN Migration Network have undermined its role further because they are expanding activities quite a lot, involving national governments. Commitment to agreed outcomes limited. Civil society is now more involved. Their priorities are regular migration options and regularization, social protection, xenophobia, and discrimination, combating that. But these are not areas where GFMD can deliver much. So suggestions for GFMD improvement: to have peer review and more focus through working groups, reduce frequency of summits and have longer chairmanship periods, and promote pilot actions, not only being a talk show, but carry out actions, and also arrange the finance. Now we come to Sustainable Development Goals. Again, I am not going to talk about it in general. These are the 17 goals about the migration-related targets only. 5.2 indirectly related because it's about trafficking and other sexual and other types of exploitation. But the more related are 8.8 and 0.7. 8.8, protect labor rights and promote safe and secure working conditions for all workers, including migrant workers, in particular women migrants. 10.7, I already mentioned. It has two indicators. This well-managed policies. Yeah. Then 10.3. Pardon? How much time?
No, you're doing well on time. You're doing well on time. That's okay. Thank you.
Okay. 10.3 on remittances to reduce transaction cost to less than 3% by 2030. 17.18 is on data by migration status. Yeah. 10.7, facilitate orderly, safe, regular, and responsible migration mobility of people, including through the implementation of planned and well-managed migration policies. Initially, it had two indicators, now 4 indicators. First, recruitment cost borne by an employer. First, it's about recruitment cost, the proportion of monthly income earned in the country of destination. IOL and World Bank are the two custodians. Second one, countries with migration policies to facilitate orderly, safe, and regular and responsible migration mobility. UN and IOM are the joint custodians. In my view, ILO got the wrong end of the stick. Actually, this policies, migration policies should have been given to the ILO, because the IOM is very good at this measurement survey and other things. With the World Bank, they can work well. They should have got that. But unfortunately, ILO ended up with this statistical indicator, not about the policies. Yeah. And then you have two new ones, number of people who died or disappeared in the process of migration towards an international destination. We know many migrants die in the sea. Proportion of the population who are refugees by country of origin, UNHCR. So recruitment cost. So it calls for global efforts to reduce recruitment costs. We know that it is one of the major factors reducing benefits from migration for migrant workers, which force them into forced labor situations. So it is monitoring that cost. It has no target, but we know that the lower, the better. International instruments say no recruitment cost or related costs should be levied on workers. ILO guidelines. So in that case, the indicator should be zero, but we know that this does not happen because many of our origin countries have legalized fees. Even Bangladesh has recently issued, referral. India has issued reference minimum wages for various countries, like that. Sri Lanka also same. Yeah. Then what up to now they have not really calculated this, come up with this statistic. What they have done is they have developed the questions, an operational manual, and have done pilot surveys. For instance, in Bangladesh, they find that from that migration costs are equivalent to 18 months of wages earned in a foreign country. For 2 years, migrant workers have to toil for nothing. I mean, they can return empty-handed. I mean, many returned empty-handed during the pandemic because Rajan's Institute carried out this wage theft studies. Vietnam, 8 months wages. Okay. Then well-managed migration policies, this 10.7.2. UNDESA, IOM, OECD collaborate to provide this indicator. It is measured using 6 policy domains and 30 sub-indicators. Migrant rights, whole of government approach and evidence-based policies, cooperation and partnerships, socio-economic well-being of migrants, mobility, dimensions of crisis, and safe, orderly, and regular migration. You can actually go to their policy briefs and find out where all the indicators and other things. The results vary across regions, but in the Asia-Pacific region, 76 countries in Central and Southern Asia fully meet the criteria in 2021, and Latin America and European countries, again, more than 70%. But these results should be interpreted with caution because this is self-reporting by countries and the coverage of countries. In this case of Central Southern Asia, it's only 57 countries have reported. Central Asia, 52. Yeah. I have this diagram. You can see this. The Central and Southern Asia, 76%. But we know. I mean, all of us know. We have experts here. You can actually tell me. I mean, do you believe this that Southern, South Asia, and also Central Asia have very good migration policies? I mean, I doubt it. Especially my own country. I can tell you. I mean, because even other countries, there are many. India is still struggling to come up with a new migration act, and Europe, we know. I mean, how they are treating migrant workers, and 74%. Latin America, of course, there is much more, good governance system, south-south migration. And Western Asia, unfortunately, GCC countries are lumped with Northern Africa and Western Asia. At least it is 50% there. Okay. Now, we come to the Global Compact for Migration. Actually, I will be very brief because your whole certificate course is on the Global Compact on Migration. You will be much better experts than me at the end of this course. So it is described as the first intergovernmental negotiated agreement prepared under the United Nations global. But some people point out this is not the first one, actually. If you look at the International Convention on Migrant Workers, UN Convention, it was negotiated by governments from 1976 up to 1990. I mean, as I mentioned, 10 years, it was the first instrument negotiated by within the auspices of the United Nations. Non-binding document that respects state sovereignty. That is why, because of state sovereignty, no country wanted to make it binding. It addresses comprehensive migration, not only labor migration, but all consistent with the 2030 agenda. It's a framework and roadmap for international and regional coordination, cooperation, and migration. So it is founded upon 10 interdependent cross-cutting principles: people-centered, international cooperation, national sovereignty, rule of law, sustainable development, human rights, gender responsive, all of government approach, nothing to quarrel about. Of course, some of these maybe national sovereignty may take precedence about some of these other things. I will not go into these details, but so the follow-up is by national governments and also at the regional level and global level. National governments have national implementation plans, which are supported by the UN network also. Regional reviews, these are supposed to be undertaken in 2020 because of COVID. Now all have taken place. If you go to their websites, UN Network on Migration website, you can download all the reports. So the overall supervisory mechanism, the International Migration Review Forum. The first one will be held during 10 to 13th May 2022. The high-level dialogue, there are two high-level dialogues, 2006 and 2013. Now that is renamed as the International Migration Review Forum. Primary intergovernmental global platform for member states to discuss and share progress on implementation. And they will come up with a progress declaration at the end of the debate. So they involve all the regional, cross-regional platforms, organizations, all the agencies involved in this program also, to review the implementation within their respective regions or domains. At the Global Forum on Migration and Development, I mentioned there was a complete to provide a space for annual consultations and provide evidence on best practices, experiences to the reporter. So they set up a UN network on migration to support the implementation. So this replaces the Global Migration Group, which was functioning from 2006 to 18, with UN agencies and IOM, which was not even loosely affiliated to the UN until 2018. So the coordinator secretariat of this is the International Organization for Migration. The government were very keen to have IOM. So this has 38 UN entities and 9 member executive committee with ILO, UNOHCR, High Commissioner for Refugees, and a number of other members. They have the executive powers. They have a capacity building mechanism, multi-partnership fund, and they also have started establishing regional and national networks. And they have various working groups which shows you areas of work, and in all these, civil society is involved in a major way. If you look at the thematic working groups, data, detention, regular pathways, which is very important. I mean, this is one of the major issues facing international migration. We always talk about it, but even though, but the bottom line is that we don't have enough regular pathways because destination countries are not willing to provide adequate pathways. Then ILO was involved in bilateral labor migration agreements, which is a very narrow area. ILO should have actually played a much more active role to provide for the protection of migrant workers, returns and reintegration, and access to search. So what are the issues? Issues related to the Global Compact for Migration. the focus is on the process, not on migrant rights or norms, which I discussed. Migrant worker conventions are mentioned in a footnote on the first page, not included with the International Convention, but ratification is mentioned only under Objective 6, but not naming any convention. So this reflects the debate. Throughout the interest of destination developed countries and global North and global South countries were there. The non-binding nature, so does not impose any additional legal obligations on states to comply. The accountability, there is no accountability for violations of the objectives. For instance, in 2020, there are 186 deaths and disappearances on migratory routes. We know that EU has prohibited even NGO ships they stopped their support ships, and they have prohibited NGOs to provide any support to these boat people, and they are diverted back to Libya with under MOUs with you. And we know Trump created big walls, and many South American migrants die on the US border. Throughout the negotiations, member states have referred to the document as a menu of options. So countries can, choose what they want to. There are too many objectives, 23 objectives, without any priorities. Countries can highlight compliance with soft objectives while leaving out controversial areas. Developed countries, this is what is already happening, So lack of commitment, because there is voluntary national reporting. I mentioned national level implementation report. Lack of commitment to develop targets and indicators to measure progress. So we know SDG agenda, 17 goals, 169 targets, and 247 indicators for measuring these targets. We talked about SDG targets and the migration, but here there's nothing like that. So it's very vague kind of, And the UN Network on Migration, IOM is the coordinator, and it's a non-normative organization. It's a very loosely affiliated to the United Nations. It does not follow the United Nations Charter. So this being made the coordinator, some researchers and civil society have questioned this. This article by Elizabeth Guild traces the concerns. Of course, the governments wanted them, but still, IOM is still the same IOM. It's with the same constitution. So some think they are part of they support the migration control agenda of the West in returning rejected asylum seekers and irregular migrant workers to their countries. This so-called voluntary return and reintegration, which is hardly voluntary. Anyway, some countries are also apprehensive of that the ownership of the state-led process is being undermined by the United Nations Network on Migration, because it is expanding to the regional level, national level, UN network. But this was supposed to be basically a state-led process. The UAE advisor to the Labour Minister, Alexis Salami, has voiced this concern in several international forums. He said, this is a UN, it's becoming a monster. We are supposed to lead the process, but now it is leading the process. And then also we find this North-South divide in global migration governance in the implementation of GC. These champion countries, now UN network appointed volunteered champion countries who will intensively implement the program. And out of these 23 only countries, Canada and Portugal are the only developed countries in the north, others are in the south. All the regional and national networks are in the south. And the projects are funded mostly in south, and funds come from the north. So it's the same also. This Mixed Migration Center Directors article shows that. So various compromises on migrant rights were made in the course of negotiation. So more commitment needed to eliminate discrimination between citizens and migrants. And reintegration objective has been subordinated to the return and readmission of nationals. That objective is a combined one. Because the European Union, their mobility partnerships always, or bilateral agreements will have return of irregular migrants and readmission of nationals as part of the agenda. Employer-tied visas and lack of this kafala system was not considered. It was in one of the initial drafts, but UAE objected and it was removed. So, detention of children not ruled out, and regulation of migrants was not mentioned as an option, although it is a recommended practice in international instruments. And more focus needed on implementation in the North. And the COVID-19 pandemic, major challenge to most of the objectives, and there is hardly any major GCM-related intervention during this critical time. So countries, let me see. So let me come to the other theme. Paddy, how am I now on time? How much more time I have?
On time, we're good. Can we give you another 10 minutes? Is that okay?
Oh, okay, yeah. Again, here,
good?
I mean, I will
15 minutes or 15 minutes. 15 minutes is still good.
Okay, right.
All right.
Here also I'll be brief because you can, this slides will be distributed to you after the presentation. And so regional economic communities in different regions have adopted a variety of labor migration governance models. I mean, they range from free movement of persons and labor, gradual lifting of all barriers to movement, residence and establishment, facilitating of movement for specific categories of workers, only for skilled workers, like in the ASEAN, or just visa reciprocity agreements, or regular exchange, or just regular exchange of information, or protection of workers in other countries. This is a very diverse kind of groupings. They have their own trajectory, governance system, pace, and objectives. Latin American and Caribbean countries have a limited number. Arab states have only, not Arab states, they have single region integrated GCC countries. Gulf countries have only one GCC. Africa has one regional organization, African Union, and 8 sub-regional organizations. There are differences in the funding models and resources. Europe, the well-known example is European Union, that comprises 28. I'm not going into detail. These are the listings, and this is actually, there's a very good discussion in the ILC report in 2017 for the general discussion on migrant workers. So these are the groupings, the region economic communities in Africa, 8 communities. And the most advanced are actually the East African community and the ECOWAS. Southern African Development Community, unfortunately, because of South Africa, progress has been limited. Regional economic communities in Asia, that is what I'm going to talk more about. Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, created in 1967, but the ASEAN Economic Community was established in 2015 only. This significant intra-ASEAN migration, Brunei, Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand are the main destinations, Philippines and other countries, the origin countries. Adoption of the ASEAN Declaration on the Protection and Promotion of the Rights of Migrant Workers in January 2007, milestone, but it's a non-binding one. It said ASEAN's commitment to promote decent, humane, productive, dignified, and remunerative employment for migrant workers. You can just see it goes much more beyond regular, orderly, and safe migration. Yeah. Of course, it's non-binding. 2015, ASEAN Economic Community as a free movement transformed ASEAN into a region with free movement of skilled labor only. Unfortunately, there are so many barriers to skilled labor. They had recognized 8 areas for mutual recognition agreement, skilled workers, but countries have various national barriers. Achievements are very limited. 87% of ASEAN migrant workers are low skills. So that is where they have to make actually some concessions and move. 2017, they adopted a non-binding. Actually, this declaration expected a binding instrument to implement it, but unfortunately, they debated for 13 years. Singapore, Malaysia were very reluctant to have such an binding instrument. Finally, came up with this ASEAN consensus on the protection and promotion of the rights of migrant workers, which is the current, but it is a very limited instrument. Most provisions, there are some good provisions, but they are all, at the end of it, it says subject to national laws and practice, which means, it doesn't mean anything that ASEAN commitment is diluted by the national law and practice. Then SAARC, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. Established in 1985, there's a major difference between ASEAN and SAARC. There's no recognized regional labor market, unlike in ASEAN. No legal recognized movements of labor in South Asia, with most countries sending workers primarily to the Gulf region. Nepali workers have a free movement to Indian workers. They have a free movement agreement, but unfortunately, Nepal does not treat them, call them migrant workers in their national policies. India has never acknowledged itself to an immigration country, as Pakistan, which has so many, Afghan workers. Labor migration has not been on the SAARC agenda only in 2014. Out of 35 commitments, there was one: collaborate and cooperate on safe and orderly and responsible management of labor migration to ensure safety, security, and well-being. But there was no other commitment. There is a SAARC action plan to set up an institutional mechanism, development SAARC declaration, like the ASEAN declaration, identify thematic areas, but nothing has happened. SAARC declaration planned in 2016, but no action plan, because there are so many sensitivities. Bangladeshi workers in India, because they had a Citizenship Act which tried to, which is a very controversial one, which tries to deny citizenship to many of the workers who have been there for a long time. Regional consultative processes. These are actually, I think, in my personal view, regional economic communities, if any progress has to be made, it's not at the global level, it's at the regional community level, where you have more homogeneous groups of countries with common interest, where you can have more free movement and labor mobility, and also safeguarding of migrant rights. Regional consultative processes are completely different ones. They are just repeated regional meetings for states dedicated to discussing migration. IOM says regional information sharing and policy dialogues in a cooperative manner, informal and non-binding. So there are informal consultations among governments that take place outside formal law institutional structures, often with the support of IOM in different regions. In Asia, this Bali process, actually it was just to combat irregular migration. I mean, it was formed to address irregular migration. It's nothing to do with labor migration. Although this, I will be discussing that the other two processes in Asia labor related. IOM actually is instrumental in setting up most of this in Africa. They identify the need for countries and get countries together. I mean, they share some common features: state-led and non, informal, flexible, focus on areas of common interest. Most deal with curbing irregular migration. So they are not actually, they don't have rights-based agendas. Platform for non-binding dialogue. And IOM support includes technical expertise, policy guidance, research, capacity building, and targeted project initiatives. So I have summarized this for Asia regional consultative process. I mentioned two: the Colombo process. No, actually I did not mention it. Sorry. The Colombo process and the Abu Dhabi dialogue. Colombo process is the first one, which was started in 2013 by Sri Lanka, and the Abu Dhabi dialogue was from 2008 by United Arab Emirates. And current chair actually is Afghanistan. I think I made a mistake here. Some people are talking.
Sorry about that. I will just mute them. I will mute them shortly. Thanks.
Yes, yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, can you silence them? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I'm just trying to locate the. Yeah, thank you.
Past. So current and this current chair is actually not Nepal, Afghanistan, which is recognized here. So the members are given here. So the important mechanism, the ministerial meetings, which are held frequently. The Abu Dhabi dialogue, they are held fairly frequently. It's the difference in Abu Dhabi dialogue is it's both origin countries and destination countries. Colombo process is only Asian labor, what they call labor sending countries, ministerial consultation. Important documents are these ministerial declarations. The Abu Dhabi dialogue has been more frequent because they have more resources. And 2021 October, they have a joint declaration. If you go to this website, you can download all their documents. Yeah, let me come to the Colombo process. It's an informal and non-binding environment to engage in dialogues. Observers, external organizations, they, of course, in addition to the member states, there are other organizations also. In all the GCC countries actually came as observers for this process, because initially they were probably suspicious what this group is going to do. Objectives: provide a forum to share experiences, consult on issues faced by their migrant workers, and propose practical solutions. There are 5 thematic areas and 5 thematic working groups also in 2016. Skills and qualification recognition. Ethical recruitment process, pre-departure orientation and empowerment, remittances, labor market analysis. All non-controversial areas. 4 cross-cutting thematic areas agreed in 2006: migrant health, migrant-related elements of the SDGs, promotion of equality for women migrant workers, and consular support for migrant workers. These 2 are very important. And focus on global frameworks related to migration also, SDG and GCD processes, GCM process, sorry. But unfortunately, I mean, they should more focus on the regional processes. The agenda is largely unfinished agenda. So the achievements according to them, 2 ministerial consultations recently, they say progress in all thematic areas, cooperation with other dialogue forums. But in my personal view, I don't see very much achieved because in this group, because there are some issues. It has some inherent limitations as an origin country only initiative. You can come to many resolutions, but if there is no, you can come to some minimum standards for workers, domestic migrant workers. But unless the other side agrees, nothing can be limited. Because I recall in 2015, UNICEF convened a conference in Colombo with GCC countries. They invited them at their expense to come and debate with the origin countries in Asia to develop a standard employment contract for domestic workers. But the GCC countries, what they said? They said, okay, you can debate in this meeting and come to some agreement. You share it with us. We will. They said, we are not here to have a dialogue, this debate with you on the contents. You decide and we will discuss it in the GCC. That is what they said. So it's so unless both sides agree, it's difficult. No progress in the negotiation of critical areas. Standard employment contract is one. Protection of female domestic workers, labor conditions, relaxing the kafala system. In one resolution it was there, but I don't think they comprehensive social protection. Sustainability has been a major issue because it's origin countries. Funds are very limited. The Swiss government has been funding mostly. This 2005 to 2010 and 2012 to 2015, no ministerial consultation because there was no funding. Too much dependence on external support, especially the Swiss government, IOM being the secretariat. They set the agenda, so we don't know whether it's the Colombo process agenda or IOM's priorities, what the countries want. Abu Dhabi dialogue has largely undermined its role because all these countries are also part of that. I will come to that. The modest achievements and engagement with global forums is not the priority for them, in my view. Abu Dhabi dialogue. This ministerial consultations on overseas employment and contractual labor for countries of origin and destination in Asia. It's Abu Dhabi dialogue launched in 2008. So the Abu Dhabi dialogue does not use the term migrant worker. They say temporary contractual labor. This is actually Gulf countries want to use that because they think if you use the term migrant workers, then these rights in the migrant worker instruments may apply to them. So they are even in their bilateral labor agreement, they use that term. So this is a brainchild of the United Arab Emirates. They were very suspicious of the Colombo process. Whether they are forming a cartel and going to demand. So that's why they were first observers. Later they said, let us join together. So all the members, are co-opted. Focus on developing 4 key action-oriented partnerships. Knowledge sharing on migration force and building capacity for matching of labor supply and demand. Preventing irregular recruitment and promotion of welfare and protection measures for migrant workers. Recruitment was from the beginning an issue. It is very easy for destination countries to GCC countries say all the problems are because of bad recruitment in the origin country. It is if you send the right workers, then no problems. So it is like the pass in the buck kind of approach. Developing a framework to manage in the entire cycle of temporary contractual work for mutual. I'm using the words in the Abu Dhabi dialogue. I don't agree with this, yeah. But because all these workers are migrant workers. They may be temporary, they may be longer term, but they are migrant workers. Recent focus areas, ethical recruitment, skills certification, comprehensive information and orientation programs. Philippines led that process. And the role of technology in the governance of labor mobility. That is very good, having digitalizing these recruitment processes to minimize corruption and intermediary role. 2019 Dubai Declaration came about the future of work in Gulf states, future of domestic work, and development of competency standards for domestic workers, rather than, which is a good standard. Skilling, skill certification and mutual recognition. They had a pilot project with India to send some skilled, to have skilled recognition between companies in Dubai and workers in India through the government, and contribution to global forums. 2021 declaration has identified enabling and improving access to justice for temporary contractual workers, integrating gender into employment promotion policies and addressing COVID-19 challenges among the 5 thematic areas. This is very, very good. But if you look at actually their agenda, it's limited because they don't talk about protection of women migrant workers. And also COVID agenda is limited to sharing information on health, on admission requirements for the origin countries. Access to justice, I don't know how they will handle that. So what are the issues about the Abu Dhabi dialogue? It has served as an important forum for dialogue between origin and destination countries in Asia. We should not deny that. Civil society also has got into the migrant forum in Asia, has been an observer for some time, and they have tried to influence this debate. And African countries are also, they were invited once as observers, but unfortunately not for the 2021. They are also interested in having a similar forum. The power dynamics are the problem. Dominant GCC interests, particularly those of the United Arab Emirates. So it seems to constrain the adoption of more concrete measures to put this declared good intentions into practice. The crucial issues do not get into agenda. The kafala system was never discussed there, post-labor practices, confiscation of passports, precarious position of female domestic migrant workers. They had a report on domestic work. You can look at that. There's not a single word about protection of domestic workers. It's all about, competition standards. Unfortunately, it was done by at that time, the coordinator of the International Federation of Women Workers. But they were told not to talk about protection, probably. Abuse and exploitation of workers in the workplace, low-skilled workers. There's nothing. That is the major problem for Asian origin countries. Minimum standards for migrant workers, including minimum wages. This is an area group to have minimum standards on working conditions, on labor inspection and other things. They can do many innovative things. Standard employment contract. So let us ask, during the COVID pandemic, did this forum help at all? Was there any special extraordinary meeting? No. It is the standard meeting. Did they do anything about wage theft, detention, deportations by Saudi Arabia? We know so many things Saudi Arabia did. So many things. One Indian worker who was in detention, engineer actually, because his contract was not renewed, he became an irregular worker. He said this detention center was like hell on earth. So it was really, even Ethiopian workers had the same problem. Yeah. So these are the issues. So what is the way forward? So what I'm saying is, do not put all the eggs in the GCM basket. But I don't deny the value of this forum. It's a very important forum. First agreement, we have to make use of that. But at the same time, follow on efforts, government, to strengthen migration governance and protection. ILO should support countries to continue to ratify and realize binding international conventions for protecting migrant rights. We talk a lot about domestic worker. How many origin countries, except the Philippines, have ratified the Domestic Worker Convention in Asia? Global Compact on Migration has to be strengthened, complemented by normative and rights-based approach. More actionable commitments to regular pathways for legal migration and regularizations. It's objective 5, but and you have then for skills and other areas, but these have to be put into concrete action. And they should have a monitoring system for compliance with commitments. Countries should acknowledge the contribution of migrant workers to their economies and build public consensus on the need for migrant workers. Many countries think, the public generally think, there are too many migrant workers and they are just, so they don't know the contributions. If you look at the Gulf countries themselves, these erstwhile desert landscapes were transformed into gleaming metropolises on the blood, sweat, and tears of millions of our poor migrant workers. This is not acknowledged. So you need greater partnerships among different actors. You need a greater role for migrant voice, their own voice, building effective migrant organizations. Post-COVID-19, need for building better on a strong foundation, not on the same precarious foundation which exists currently, where it's substandard accommodation, substandard working conditions, and non-effective bilateral labor agreements, etc. But we want a stronger foundation. And of course, decent work and development in origin countries to facilitating migration by choice, not by need. This is GCIM accord, which is accepted by the GCIM also, the second objective. Thank you very much. I have given a list of references for you to go through. So I will stop my sharing of my presentation. Thank you very much. I hope I did not exceed too much.
Dr. Piasiri, no, thank you. And we decided to just give you more time to finish, because I think you were in a very good moment there, particularly in the end, just allowing us to understand what, so we have these regional organizations and regional mechanisms, but also just diving into the regional consultative processes, which, as you have said, some may not have the teeth, but still are an important part of the multilateral processes that are there. So thank you very much. And I think we really also got a great opportunity to understand the issues that are related to the Global Compact itself. And I think this is particularly important in this year, where we will have the International Migration Review Forum, that, various regional organizations, various regions, countries, civil society, researchers, I think all of us are looking to what's going to be happening in May. So I think, your presentation in running us through from the Migration Network, the work that they do, but also these slides where you went through these GCM challenges are particularly important for us to reflect on and refresh as we move towards the IMRF and understand, when different speakers that we see in different spaces are talking about, and I think you have really dug into them. We particularly, I think, in this, for GCM, we often talk about the cornerstone, and I think it's something that was coined around discussions on the GCM here at GRFDT, together with MFA and other partners in the People's Migration Challenge, where we talk about this cornerstone objective on the legal pathways. And I think you managed to also just shed even more light for us. So we're really, really grateful for this comprehensive presentation. I'm actually echoing a share that's coming in the chat. So let's give at least 15 minutes or so for or even 20 minutes if we can squeeze it. And I would just ask students to raise their hands so that we can share. Justin, thank you for your remarks. I also see there was a conversation with Arjun. So Arjun, please feel free to unmute your mic. And also, a compliment that came from Jiban, but if there's some very specific questions that we have, some very specific reflections. Justin, are you able to unmute, or I will go ahead and read your question? Okay, let me read the question. Dr. Piasiri, Justin was just saying, oh, there we go. And then Joanne Gloria, you can come in right after this question. Dr. Piasiri, the question is that we have so many policies in the basket of migration, but the implementation is the problem in one hand, as the countries claim sovereignty. On the other hand, there is no binding treaties, no institutional organization is forced, and such that human rights, nobody's doing something about the human rights in terms of defending the rights of the migrants on the ground. What can we do in terms of enforcement with regards to all policies to support the human rights of migrants?
Shall I answer this now or take a few questions?
Maybe we can take a second question from Joanne Gloria, so you can combine the two responses and we take a set more. Joanne Gloria, feel free to unmute.
Thank you so much, Dr. Paddy. our moderator and facilitator today. Today's topic is very relevant in accordance to what we are facing in the world of migration. My concern, or a question rather, is this: in the event that we have two countries having a bilateral agreement, signing a bilateral agreement that it's supposed to govern the migrant workers. Now that, what if that's the destination country or the receiving country is not able to, or does violate those bilateral agreements? Who is then answerable, or who is supposed to take up the responsibility of the people who have been violated in that matter? And yet there was an agreement with those particular countries, the sending and the receiving. Thank you very much.
Okay.
You can go ahead, Dr. Piasiri.
Yes, yeah. Yes, thanks to, was it Arjun? Yes. Yes, I have no disagreement with Arjun's question. Actually, we have many trees, because many people have expressed that we have enough. I mean, decades ago, people, commentators have said we have enough standards at hand. The problem is, we don't need new standards. The problem is implementation. How do we effectively implement them? It is not. It does not only apply to migrant worker instruments, because some of the rights violated are actually basic human rights, like forced labor and child labor and the discrimination. So which is some of this. If you take the case of Gulf Cooperation Council countries or the Arab states, they have ratified some of the Universal Human Rights Conventions, which like CEDAW, or CED, which deal with some of these issues. The problem. But implementation is the major issue. So this is why I said, this multidimensional issue, because the tragedy is that increasingly, there is a tendency towards softer instruments, that because in 2004, when ILO had the general discussion, the worker group initially wanted to develop a new instrument, to have a framework instrument to replace 1949 Migration for Employment and 1975 Migrant Workers Convention, to combine them and make it more forceful. But then they found the ground was not very good for that. Employers and governments gave a strong message. In this case, in that case, they thought, if they negotiated in 2004, the standards accepted in 1949 or 1979 would go down. So they decided to actually just have a general discussion, not go for an instrument. So we have, since then, we had the multilateral framework on labor migration, and then we had the this general guidelines on recruitment guidelines and related definition of costs. So implementation is So I think this is where these partnerships are very much needed. Multi-stakeholder approach. Because it has to be done at the country level. If you try to do at the global level, I think it's very difficult to do that. But at regional level and also and then national level, all partners should get together, especially the trade union movement and the civil society. This is why I also said these regional economic communities offer more promise, because that is where you can have and take the East African community, or the ECOWAS. Unfortunately, the tragedy is that at the same time, European Union is coming into with their trust fund for Africa. They come into some agreements which curtail mobility, this free movement. Trying to even ECOWAS nationals cannot cross into another Niger or someplace. They will be arrested and returned back. Which is a fundamental principle of ECOWAS. So I think all stakeholders have to get together, and because the ratification also, we have to go for more ratification, but ratification is only the first step, unless you put it into national law and then have enforcement mechanisms and provide for access to justice mechanisms. It does not make sense, and many countries don't do that. Sri Lanka ratified the UN Convention, but did nothing to implement that. Yeah, about the second question, bilateral labor agreements, and that's a good question because I am an expert on bilateral labor agreements. I have been working on it for the last 3-4 years or so. No, for the last 15 years. Yeah, this is a very good question, because there are many forms of bilateral labor migration instruments. I call them BLMIs. Agreement is bilateral labor agreement. If you can have an agreement, it's better because it's supposed to be legally binding. But many countries also want to have in Asia. Most countries want to have MOUs, memorandum of understanding, which are not binding. But in practice, the two countries, because most of the protection issues, actually, part of the protection issues are in the origin country, but we cannot blame only the country of destination, because unless the origin country controls the recruitment agencies. Now take the case of Bangladesh. I said, almost 20 months, 18 months salary paid for to recover the migration cost. So what is the government doing about it? They have not been able to do anything. Even this new agreement with Malaysia, they say they can allow 100,000 taka, which is quite a lot, more than $1,000 recruitment cost. So this is one part. At the other end, of course, the destination countries, workplace protection is up to them. But of course, although the agreements may say they will enforce workplace treatment or the employment contract in the destination country, it does not happen, because we find many of them are not effectively implemented. The question is, what is who is responsible? Both parties are responsible because they have to take it up in the joint committee. They have a mechanism for implementation called the joint committee, composed of officials from both sides. So, but these are, in some cases, these are inactive, even at the joint committee level. There is not much happening, because they are not very serious. Although these are legally binding documents, I haven't seen any country actually going to a tribunal or, taking it up internationally, because unlike in trade agreements, but in a multilateral or regional trade agreements, they're going to courts can be more common. Bilateral, there is more sensitivity in a bilateral labor agreement. Origin country will think twice before trying to put a court case, because then you immediately cut off that source of demand. This is why. So you have not seen. So in practice, I have not seen any difference between MOUs, bilateral MOUs, and agreements. So the only way this can be done is through this unequal bargaining power between the destination country and the origin country is unfortunately thing. But the origin country should take a more firm position, more assertive position, and take up with them about this non-observance of non-implementation of the agreements. This is universal in all regions. It is happening. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that response. And I think one of the questions that has also been posed, I think there's a lot of direction around protection related issues, is a very specific one that goes to South Africa. We're very happy to kind of share. I don't know if you wanted to share some reflections, but the question is also asking more about, what are the protection issues that we really should be seeing addressing the rampant abuse of human rights of labor migrants, particularly those that have happened in South Africa. So I think an issue there of enforcement and trying to understand, if I may as well just come in from my experience, is that, it really depends on the voice of the origin of the country of origin of those migrants, and the relations that they have with the respective government departments. And I think it's an issue also of follow-up. A lot of these things remain kind of not caught up in the relevant spaces in the data, or sometimes also remain not reported to consular services within embassies. Not to blame the migrants, but particularly it's the system. The problem is that if migrants feel that the system does not sufficiently address their complaints, it's highly unlikely that these may be reported onto consular protection. And interestingly enough, under the GCM webinar series, we will be looking at the role of consular services for migrants in about 2 weeks' time. So, Dean Mulozi, it would be really interesting to also hear, these kind of perspectives. I think we have also touched on it in terms of when we talked about recruitment processes and what that means. And I think this is something that also Dr. Piasiri has pointed out with some examples from the Asian region. And I will share actually a case that was shared with us not too long ago, which shows engagement between Sri Lankan-based lawyers beyond borders, the ILO, with one of the regional migration specialists that we've also featured on GCM webinar series, Mr. Nair, together with the Migration Forum in Asia, and a collaboration that sort of saw a breakthrough case where, an employer had his passport confiscated and his residence permit had expired. And interestingly enough, in the tail of the story, it's the wife that went to make the complaint at the various authority. But that interaction that came from different actors coming together saw him having a breakthrough in this case, in terms of taking him away from this bonded labor arrangement that he had. So I think that in a lot of ways, as Dr. Piasiri has said, and I'm answering particularly the South African question that has been asked here, is that there's that spectrum of different actors. There's the migrants group themselves on the ground in terms of bringing these cases up. There's the role that consular plays. I think in some countries we even have labor attaches. Philippines seems to be a very standing example that have even put labor attaches as part of consular services. So migrants know that this is a dedicated desk, which is actually also welcome to receive complaints. But in most countries, countries of origin that is sending labor, these desks they lack. Consular protection are very happy to renew your visa, to renew your passport. They're very happy to help for those who even manage a driving license, or to help with the birth certificates. So with regular migration related services, it seems to be working somewhat good, but for those who may have issues that are related to employment, those that may have even issues that are related to social cohesion, that space still remains very limited in terms of the capacity. So I think some very interesting places we could touch. I think we were going to just ask you one more question, Dr. Piasiri, and then I will ask Professor Binod to come and give us a reflection. And I think this question sort of comes to some of the challenges that you have discussed. And thank you, Cecily, for pointing that out. Yes, indeed, it's really interesting to see the discussion of challenges, because we see the multidimensional issues that are related to the compact for migration. So I think the question that we have, Dr. Piasiri, is like, when we look at these challenges and thinking about May coming up with the forum, the review forum on international migration, that kind of picks on these. Where do you sort of see, do you see the potential or any room for any change? Are countries receptive to this change? Have we learned enough from COVID to say that it's time for us to change? Have we learned enough from the past so that we can really impact on our future? Maybe in 2 minutes, if you can, Dr. Piasiri.
Okay, it's not a question which can be answered in 2 minutes, but I will try. Yes, I think I recognize the value of a forum like IMRF. It is much stronger than the high-level dialogue which existed before, because some countries, origin countries, especially the Philippines, wanted to convene an international conference on international migration for a long time, but the UN member states were not willing, unlike on other issues, to convene a conference. So the only thing they agreed was to have this high-level dialogue, which on migration, which was a much more limited kind of thing. So in that context, to have a global compact for migration is a great achievement. I don't deny that. So So, and also it is good that we are raising these issues and there is, more stakeholder involvement. I'm sorry, in this lecture, I could not talk about civil society and, social partner involvement. There was no time, but so with this and, so what we have to think of is within the IMRF, but of course, my feeling is that when you go up the hierarchy, national level, regional level, global level, so what you can do is get reduced, so you should not be too ambitious as you go up. So if you want to do more concrete things, do it at the national level, at the lowest level, where things can be more controlled, or at the regional level, regional economic community level, the global level, try to go for principles and other things. So let us see. I mean, in the first, International Migrant Review Forum, the problems will come up and other things. Because if you looked at the Global Forum on Migration and Development, after 13, 14 meetings, we have not really achieved very much, but this is probably different. I mean, this is a different kind of forum. So what we have learned is, I think what we should learn is to look for in this field, to look for incremental change, because we cannot really overnight have major changes, So each country, each partner, should try to do things at the ground level, at the national level, what they can be doing and how to influence these processes, at the national level and then at the regional level, like that. So that is the answer I can give, but I have no answer than that. So let us see, I mean, the first international forum, because whether it becomes a talk forum or, whether something can be achieved, so thank you.
Exactly. I think you are right. Principles at global level and something much more concrete still has to be left at the national level. And I think you are right in terms of bringing in the effort of civil society, research, academia. I think you mentioned today already trade unions, employers, associations, all these being very important parts. And we're also glad that our students at some point were also able to follow some very specific sessions that looked at the role of civil society. Dr. Piasiri, thank you so much. I will ask Professor Binod to share some reflections with us.
Thank you, Paddy. I have had the occasion of listening and interacting with Piasiri for a long, long time. It's an opportunity to listen to him today also in this forum, particularly with his vast experience of being in the ILO. I think he started by saying that good news, bad news, but I don't think there was any bad news there. It was his modesty that, he was sharing with us. But I think there could not have been a better lecture, which actually covered so much ground in this particularly very difficult topic of multilateral stakeholders.
Professor Binod, I think we lost your audio. Just unmute. Thank you.
Okay. Is it okay now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm saying that there are, elements and flags in his lecture that we need to carry back home in terms of various complications that are there at different levels, multilateral, negotiations, and then regional and national and, subnational level. Also, I would like to add that subnational level also, because in a country like India, its subnationality is very important, state level, and even, we have been talking about cities many times, but we have not given much importance to that. And that, I think, is the crux of his presentation today, that you have to look at the very micro level rather than going at the macro level, and super macro level. And that's where I think people know my own views after having experienced some of the multilateral negotiations. The UN level, I realize how, hollow they are in terms of being, first of all, not a level playing field. And, there are clubs within clubs. That's where the global south stands divided, and the global north have their own, collusion. So it's not at all, as you said, is an equitable distribution of power there. And that's where I think it's very important. And as you said, agenda setting, all the crucial topics or subjects are not kept in the agenda. For example, not a single time have I come across any discussion on visas. Visa has always been a hot potato. They, in the name of sovereignty, no country even flags this. Secondly, what I find very important in his is that the onus is also on the global south, the countries of origin. The countries of origin have to speak their mind, take into account, rather than just towing the line. That I think is extremely important, and I find there is lack of training there. The negotiations training is not there. Secondly, the intent is very much divided. There are vested interests within the bureaucracy, within the policy circles, and so on. So that actually sets the ground for the big divide between policy, practice, and finally, as you said, implementation. That I think it needs to be looked into. There has to be, inward-looking appraisals, and that's where civil society organizations have a big role to bring them to the fore. And I think this is the right opportunity, as you said, that the post-COVID situation has revealed to us many of the weaknesses that are existing in the multilateral understanding, because the self-interest that drives the countries actually has been, its dark side has been revealed. The waste, theft, and other things that he has mentioned are extremely important issues that we need to take into account. And what I liked about him is that the slogan of the GCM, the safe, orderly, and regular migration, questioning the terminologies, is very interesting. And at the same time, it resonates my own intervention at the UN when I said I understand what is safe and regular, but what is orderly? And one of the members countries representative fell into that trap of trying to answer that question. It was a tongue-in-cheek question, and said orderly is just the opposite of disorderly. And I think I could not but only laugh it out. But today, Piasiri, I'm glad that you have said, you have asked orderly. Even the slave trade, slave migration was also orderly. So can we say that they should be regimented and be walking in, patterns of regularity or patterns of orderliness and things like that? So, and safety for whom? Is it the state safety, border safety, or it is the safety of the migrants? That I think is the crux of the whole issue. So that's where we need to understand. And he has given the historical background of the multilateral agencies. IOM was an intergovernmental agency, and then was given the status of the, some kind of a hybrid UN agency. As you said, I think it comes from his vast experience. And I'm glad that he has said that some of the organizations like the ILO have been marginalized. That I think we are throwing the baby with the bathwater in terms of bringing them on the platform. And that actually tells us that, there is not hunky-dory amongst the international organizations. There are pulls and pushes and other kinds of, dynamics that works behind the scene that we are not aware of. And I think that in that sense, today's lecture by Piasiri has been an eye-opener. It gives us so much of leads to follow, to do the follow-up. It was, he was taking a class. It's a classroom lecture, and I think it was par excellence. So I congratulate Piasiri. I learned so much, and I'm sure all the participants also learned so much about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Binod, for your kind words.
Thank you very much, Professor Binod, for those reflections. And we just also want to extend again a sincere thanks to Dr. Piasiri for joining us today. And as Professor Binod said, we were all, even for those of us who've been working around migration governance for quite a number of years, had a lot of eye-openers in that presentation. We're looking forward to even digesting it more. And thank you again, Dr. Piasiri, for making this available for us and the students. So we will be sharing it in the Google Classroom. And please do feel free to share with us any questions, reflections that you may have on it. But I think we had a really, really excellent time here today in terms of the learning that has taken place. But I think also realizing that there's still a lot of challenges that have to be dealt with, and not all of these are to be addressed through this multilateral processes, which actually has many wings and many dimensions that we can look at, and we can continue the discussion in the classroom and through the engagement with the Global Compact for Migration webinar series on Tuesdays. As usual, we are moving to a very interesting topic on Tuesday. We'll be looking at alternatives to detention, GCM 13, and our panel is now confirmed, so we'll be sharing that with you. We ask you to take note that the time is back at 3 p.m. for the GCM webinar series, and then we have a lecture again on Saturday for the rest of the calendar. And for today, we just want to say thank you to all the 100 plus students who have joined us. Thank you for being with us. Again, special thanks to Dr. Piasiri, and have a very good day. Stay healthy and take care and be safe, everyone. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Binod. Thanks, Rajan. Thanks, Paddy.
Thank you, Dr. Piasiri.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Great seeing you.
Okay.
Joanne, Gloria, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. So shall I vanish? Okay.
Yes, that is okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so
I
much.
apply
We
some
will
vanishing
all-
cream.
Yeah, we'll all vanish.
Yes. Okay. Bye bye.
One day.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Dr. Senwe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vese. Thank you. Hi, Rakesh, just coming back to check if students for the next class are joining in this one already.